December 14th, 1922, Perry, Florida. Smoke rose slow and lazy into a winter sky that should have stayed quiet. The sound of crickets faded under the shuffle of boots, footsteps, dozens of them. The smell of kerosene drifted through humid air thick with fear. Down on Lafayette Street, Samuel Carter turned the key in the front door of his store for the last time. He straightened a shelf of cane syrup jars, dusted the counter, and whispered a small prayer of thanks. He had no idea that before sunrise, men were coming with torches and guns. 3 blocks away at the courthouse, a crowd of white men gathered. Sheriff John Hendry told his deputies to go home early. The office lights dimmed. By midnight, the mob was ready. They said they were hunting a man named Charles Wright, a young mill worker accused of attacking a white woman. But they weren't hunting justice. They were hunting land. What happened in the next 72 hours erased one of the most prosperous black communities in Florida. 8 people confirmed dead, dozens more missing. Every business burned, every home reduced to ash, a town wiped off the map. For 100 years, it wasn't in a single Florida textbook. Not one. You've heard of Tulsa, maybe you even heard of Rosewood, but no one told you about Perry, the place where faith and enterprise met fire and hate, the place where the lie of separate but equal went up in smoke. You were never meant to hear this story, because if you knew what really happened here, you'd understand where your family's stolen wealth went. You'd see the system that burned down your inheritance and called it justice. Get ready. After this story, you'll never see Florida history the same way again. What I'm about to tell you isn't folklore. It's documented truth buried under a century of silence. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Let's go back to the beginning. By the early 1920s, Perry was thriving. Small town, big vision. About 2,800 people lived there tucked inside Taylor County. 40% were black. Most of them descendants of men and women who had come out of slavery only 50 years earlier. They built their own district along Lafayette Street. 3 blocks of ambition, courage, and faith. You could buy groceries at Carter & Sons General Store, smell fresh bread from Miller's Bakery, hear the hammer's rhythm at Johnson Brothers Lumber Mill. On Sundays, you'd see families in pressed clothes walking to Williams AME Church while children practiced hymns just down the road. This wasn't just survival, it was success. Samuel Carter's store made $12,000 a year. That's over $200,000 in today's money. The Johnson brothers owned 140 acres of prime timberland worth more than $8,500 back then. Reverend Joshua Williams led a congregation of 200 families. He was more than a pastor. He was a leader, a teacher, the heart of that town. Dr. Henry Washington, a graduate of Meharry Medical College, treated whoever came through his door. White or black didn't matter. The man healed people, and for a moment it looked like Perry might defy the pattern of the South. For a moment it looked like freedom might actually work. But behind closed doors, resentment brewed like poison. White businessmen Cyrus Thompson and J.B. Peacock had been watching that black district grow, watching land values rise. They wanted those acres. They wanted the timber, the store lots, the control. Now you already know how this story starts in America. A false accusation, a white woman's cry, a black man's name whispered in the dark. December 14th, 1922. Her name was Ruby Hendricks, a young teacher. The man she accused was Charles Wright, a 22-year-old mill worker walking home after his shift. She claimed he scared her, said he approached her improperly. No witnesses, no evidence, no bruises, only her word, and in Jim Crow, Florida, her word was a weapon. Sheriff Henry Ruby's cousin deputized 40 white men on the spot. They grabbed rifles and hunting dogs. They said they were bringing Charles Wright to justice. Everyone in Perry knew what that really meant. Charles ran. He hid in the swamps east of town, chased by men with blood in their eyes. That night, Reverend Williams called an emergency meeting at the church. 75 people came, their voices tight and hushed. Mothers packed family papers, deeds, birth certificates, whatever proof of existence they had. Men cleaned rifles, those old World War I veterans, ready to defend what was theirs. Samuel Carter stood up and said the words burned into memory. "We built this with our hands. We ain't leaving because of lies. If they come, we'll defend what's ours and answer to God for the rest." They were fighting history itself, because this wasn't just about one town. It was the same script that had played in Ocoee 2 years earlier. The same violence that would explode in Rosewood just weeks after Perry. That night felt heavy. The air carried something electric, something tragic. Dogs barked in the distance. Men whispered prayers they hoped their children wouldn't hear. Midnight came. The courthouse bell rang, once echoing down empty streets. Then came footsteps, leather soles on dirt, men laughing low, drunk on hate. The first house went up in flames before anyone could scream. Samuel Carter saw orange light splash across his window. He told his wife to take the children out the back door towards the woods. He loaded his rifle. Out in the street, hundreds gathered. 200, maybe 4. Some wore hoods, some didn't bother. Torches and hand rifles slung across shoulders. They shouted for Charles Wright. They shouted for blood. Carter stepped onto the porch. He shouted back once. They fired. The bullet hit his chest. He fell where he stood. The mob dragged his body into the road, poured kerosene on the store that took him 20 years to build, and lit the match. The flames jumped across Lafayette Street like the devil had come to collect a debt. By 1 in the morning, the fire had spread through the entire black business district. The bakery, gone. The lumber mill, gone. The doctor's office, gone. Reverend Williams and 30 men barricaded themselves inside the church. They prayed. They sang under gunfire. The mob surrounded the building and set it ablaze. Some shot from inside. Others tried to break through windows. It didn't matter. When the roof collapsed, Reverend Williams, Marcus Taylor, and Benjamin Green were still inside. They died holding their ground. By dawn, Perry smelled like burnt wood and hair and sorrow. 8 dead at least, maybe 15, maybe 25. No one knows the real number because no one wrote it down. At sunrise, white men patrolled what was left of Lafayette Street rifles, still warm. Children cried in the woods, clutching their mothers. Hundreds of families gathered what little they could carry and left. They walked 14 miles to Mayo. Some caught trains heading north. None ever went back. Hold that image in your mind. 1,000 people running from everything they owned. Because this next part shows you it wasn't just rage. It was economics. What happened after the fire proves they knew exactly what they were doing. By noon, the smoke had started to fade. Ash covered the ground like snow. Every building along Lafayette Street was gone. Where once stood businesses, homes, schools, churches, there was only silence and ruin. Sheriff Hendry wrote a brief report later that day. He called it property damage caused by racial tensions. That was his entire explanation. 8 deaths reduced to a sentence. Not a single arrest was made. Not one. Within a week, the county labeled 87 Black-owned properties as abandoned. Families had fled out of fear, and that's all it took. The land was confiscated for unpaid taxes. Never mind that many of those taxes were already paid. Within 3 months, every one of those properties was auctioned off. Samuel Carter's store, worth $3,200, sold for $85,000. The Johnson brothers' timberland, valued at $8,500, sold for $340,000. The buyers, the same men who'd been trying to pressure them for nearly 2 years. Cyrus Thompson, J.B. Peacock. This wasn't chaos. It was organized theft. You can trace the transactions. You can find them in county records under new ownership by 1923. That land still sits in white ownership today, worth millions. The Carter family never returned. His widow took the children to Jacksonville. The oldest son, Robert, was 21. Educated, ambitious, a man who should have inherited a business. Instead, he worked as a janitor until the day he died. His grandsons live today, still renting homes, wondering why they never had a family property to inherit. The Millers split apart. Martha cleaned houses in Tallahassee, her bakery recipes lost with her papers in the fire. The Johnson brothers tried to start again in Atlanta, but neither recovered from what happened. By 1930, Perry's black population dropped from 1,100 to 340. By 1950, it fell further. The rest scattered across Florida. The massacre worked. For those behind it, it was success. Now, if Perry were the only story like this, maybe someone could call it tragedy. But Perry was part of a pattern, a long, unbroken line across the South. When you set their names side by side, you see the truth plain as day. Every time we built something, they destroyed it. Look at the timeline. November 2nd, 1920, Ocoee, Florida, a prosperous black community near Orlando. Black citizens tried to vote. White mobs killed as many as 60. They hanged July Perry from a tree. His land citrus groves, worth $50,000, stolen overnight. Just 2 years later came Perry. 4 weeks after that, Rosewood. Same lie, same method. A white woman claimed a black man attacked her. White mobs burned an entire town in Levy County, Florida. Dozens dead. All property seized. Go back a bit further. 1919, Elaine, Arkansas. Black farmers organized to demand fair payment for cotton. White mobs and federal troops killed over 100 sharecroppers in 2 days. 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma. The richest black community in America burned down. 35 city blocks reduced to rubble. Over 300 murdered. $32 million in property value gone, never repaid. 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina. A coup d'etat. White supremacists overthrew an elected interracial government. Fired guns into streets, dumped bodies in rivers, stole every black seat of power. See it yet. Every single time black wealth grew, the same reaction followed. Lies. Fire, murder, seizure, silence. That's not coincidence. That's a blueprint. The blueprint of American theft. They called it riots to make it sound mutual. But these weren't riots. These were massacres, organized raids on prosperity. They destroyed successful black communities, then rewrote the story to blame the victims. And this is where you start to understand why the black-white wealth gap exists today. It's not a mystery. It's math. You steal land once, then you prevent loans. Then you manipulate taxes. Then you block education. Then you use police to intimidate anyone who tries again. That's not accident. That's policy. Pause for a second. Let that sink in. Because the same Florida newspapers that ignored Perry also ignored Rosewood Ocoee, all of them. The same governors who refused to investigate had financial ties to the men who took the land. They didn't just burn property, they burned records. In 1925, the Taylor County Courthouse claimed its old deeds were lost in a storage fire. Convenient. Every document showing black land ownership gone. That's how you erase a legacy. You destroy the proof. And they did it everywhere. In Tulsa City, officials bulldozed Greenwood's remains before families could even reclaim lots. They changed fire codes so nothing could be rebuilt. Insurance companies used fine print to deny every claim. In Wilmington, white leaders rewrote textbooks to call the massacre a riot. Kids learned for decades that black people tried to take over the city until order was restored. In Florida, classrooms, you never saw the names Carter Williams or Miller. You never saw 1923 in any history chapter. The state didn't officially acknowledge Rosewood until 1994. Perry never. By silencing the stories, they kept generations from demanding justice. And here's the cruel genius of it. When your history's erased, your descendants blame themselves. Why am I struggling, they ask. Why can't I catch up? Because the playing field was burned before you were born. You see, generational wealth multiplies. Land passed to a son becomes equity for his business. That business sends grandchildren to college. They start new companies, buy more homes, keep the cycle. But when land is stolen, when homes are burned, that chain is broken. Your start line moves backward. In Perry alone, over 2,300 acres of black-owned land vanished. $45,000 in 1922, money gone equal to nearly $1 million today. But if compounded at normal rates, that's tens of millions. Multiply Perry by hundreds of towns, and you start seeing $100 trillion of stolen black wealth. That's your missing inheritance. And yet they say the wealth gap is about effort. Let's be real. The median white household in America today holds $188,000 in wealth. The median black household holds $24,000. That's not laziness. That's theft with interest. Now imagine if Perry had survived. Imagine the grandchildren of Samuel Carter still owning that store. Imagine the Johnson land turned into a lumber company spanning across Florida. Imagine college funds, businesses, legacies. That's what was stolen. Some people say reparations are unrealistic, but God's law says otherwise. Exodus chapter 22. If a man steals an ox, he must repay fivefold. If he takes a sheep, fourfold. Leviticus says the thief must restore what was taken plus a fifth more. By God's measure, America owes not billions, trillions. And if you think that sounds radical, ask yourself, what's radical, demanding justice or living another 100 years on stolen ground? Redlining kept our families from getting mortgages. Urban renewal bulldozed black neighborhoods. The prison system replaced slave labor with chain gangs. History doesn't repeat word for word. It rhymes. Same melody, new verse. That's why we face gentrification right now. That's why old black neighborhoods across Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville are being flipped into condos. Modern land theft wearing a business suit. They use zoning laws now instead of torches, but the result's the same. And mass incarceration, it's just another form of control. Arrest redline youth pack prisons, lease their labor for pennies. Florida has one of the highest black incarceration rates in the country. Same state where Perry burned. The system just changed clothes. You see, power doesn't retire. It reinvents itself. That's why truth like this matters. Because once you see the pattern, you can break it. All right, let's take a moment right here. Yeah, you listening? If what you've heard already has shaken something inside you, this is the time to act. Comment the word truth down below. Hit like if you're tired of lies. Share this with someone who needs to wake up. YouTube doesn't promote videos that tell stories like Perry's unless you push it. When you engage, when you share, you force this truth back into light. Because silence is how they buried us. Voice is how we dig out. If you're ready for more, stay with me. Because what I'm about to reveal next explains exactly how they kept this buried for a century and how you can reclaim it. Now think about what had to happen for Perry to vanish from memory. Someone had to decide not to print it. Someone had to hide the files. There were layers: physical destruction, legal suppression, educational erasure, media manipulation, 4 walls around truth. First, the physical. The ruins of Perry were cleaned up within weeks. Black residents were banned from returning to salvage anything. A white cleanup crew bulldozed Lafayette Street, burned deeds titles, photographs, anything that proved what once was. Some of those ashes mixed with the same earth where churches once stood. Then came the legal wall. The state labeled all seized lots abandoned under property law. Anyone not present to pay taxes lost their claim after 90 days. Those who tried to return were threatened. Florida Governor Kerry Hardy refused to open an inquiry. He did nothing for Rosewood weeks later either. His political backers included the very men gaining from the seizures. Local courts blocked any claim from black survivors. The law said black testimony against white citizens was unreliable, so every witness statement thrown out. All juries white, all verdicts predictable. Federal agencies ignored it. The Justice Department called them local disturbances. Presidents stayed silent to keep Southern allies happy. Then came the schools. Florida textbooks through the 60s never once mentioned a race massacre. Not one line about Perry. It wasn't oversight. It was policy. History books used sanitized words, racial tension disorder riot. They called massacres riots to blame the victims. They cropped photographs to remove burned bodies. Teachers who tried to tell the truth faced firing. In the 50s, several black educators lost their jobs for teaching about Ocoee, for discussing lynching, for saying segregation was wrong. By the time our parents sat in classrooms, they thought the South had moved on peacefully. They never knew we'd been massacred into poverty. Then came the media. Newspapers in December 1922 called Perry's destruction a Negro uprising. They wrote that white citizens acted in defense. They printed lies as headlines. National outlets shrugged. Too small a town, they said. Too many headlines from elsewhere. That's how true stories die, one editorial decision at a time. They wanted America to believe racial violence was chaos, spontaneous. But look close, it followed money every time. Wherever black land held value, blood followed. Every act of burning, every false arrest, every cover story, part of an old system protecting stolen wealth. Now maybe you're asking, what's the point of resurrecting all this pain? Haven't we suffered enough? You need to hear this because pain without truth breeds despair. But pain with truth breeds power. Once you name what happened, you can name who you are again. And you are not what the books portrayed. Your ancestors weren't helpless victims. They were builders, innovators, visionaries. Samuel Carter was an entrepreneur. Reverend Williams, a leader. Dr. Washington, a healer. Martha Miller, an artist of sustenance. They were erased not because they failed, but because they succeeded. The system didn't fear black poverty. It feared black prosperity. That's what they tried to kill in Perry. And in killing it, they thought they stopped the lineage. But here you are. You're proof they didn't finish the job. And now comes the part where this story turns. Because this isn't just about what they did. It's about what we do next. Listen close. You are not here by chance. God doesn't deal in accidents. The fact you're hearing this right now means the chain of silence has been broken in your lifetime. That's divine timing. Maybe your grandmother never got to tell you her stories. Maybe your parents didn't even know them, but it's reaching you right here, right now. That means you carry the assignment to remember, to rebuild, to demand restitution. You don't do that by begging. You do it by standing tall in truth. The very breath in your lungs is the evidence that the fire didn't win. The fire may have taken the buildings, but it didn't take the bloodline. What's left now is the same choice every generation faces. Stay quiet and let them dictate your story, or speak truth and transform the silence into power. Let's bring this straight to the present moment. Look at America right now. The average white household holds $188,000 in wealth. The average black household, $24,000, 8 to 1. And they tell us it's about effort, about savings, about financial literacy. That's the lie that keeps the wheel turning. The real reason sits in the ashes of towns like Perry, Rosewood, Tulsa. Every time we built wealth, they destroyed it. Every time we bought land, they seized it. Every time we organized, they infiltrated and dismantled it. That gap wasn't created by laziness. It was engineered by force. Think about this. Samuel Carter's store was worth $3,200 in 1922. If his family had kept that property, its modern value would be $400,000 or $500,000. Multiply that across generations, across businesses, and you start seeing what was taken. The Johnson Brothers timberland, 140 acres near the river today, that's worth around $3 million. But they got nothing. Their families got nothing. White landowners sold timber from that soil for a century. So when you wonder why some families have trust funds and others have debt, go back to those fires. The wealth gap isn't a mystery. It's a crime scene that was never investigated. Now they want you to think slavery was the only period of theft. But Perry was 57 years after emancipation. The victims were free citizens, business owners, homeowners. Their property was protected by law on paper. In reality, paper means nothing when the courthouse burns and the sheriff lights the match. And the theft never stopped. It just changed forms. After the massacres came redlining in the 1930s. Banks drew red lines around black neighborhoods on maps and refused loans. After that came urban renewal. The government called it progress, bulldozed entire black districts to build highways and stadiums. Then came mass incarceration, turning our brothers and fathers into a labor force inside prisons. One system ends, another begins. They called it reform, but it was all the same logic. Keep control, limit movement, protect stolen wealth. Now gentrification finishes the cycle. Developers buy property in historic black neighborhoods. They raise taxes until the families that built those communities can't afford to stay. Then they rename it, rebrand it, and erase the past. Sound familiar? It's Perry just wearing a business suit. So when someone says the past has nothing to do with the present, you tell them this: you're still walking on stolen ground. But let me tell you something even stronger. God doesn't leave theft unaddressed. The book of Isaiah says, "You will receive a double portion instead of shame." That means not just restoration, but multiplication. Perry's story isn't over because descendants like you exist. You carry the same resilience Samuel Carter had the night they came for him. You carry the same courage Reverend Williams had when he refused to leave his church. That power is in your DNA. Say it out loud. I am not what they say I am. I am not broken. I am not lost. I am not a victim. You are a survivor of an unfinished war. And that means you have work to do. You were born into a generation that can finally recover what was stolen. Technology connects survivors. DNA records link bloodlines. Legal teams trace deeds. Grassroots groups calculate reparations. This isn't revenge. This is justice. This is biblical restitution. And the first step is remembering. Your grandmother's struggle to buy a home wasn't just personal hardship. It was part of an organized denial of generational wealth. Your father's low wages weren't chance. Your student loans weren't a coincidence. Every piece ties back to that blueprint. The moment you connect those dots, you reclaim power. You stop blaming yourself. You start demanding what's owed. And you carry pride instead of shame. Your lineage built empires. Out of chains came architects, preachers, business owners, scholars. Out of ashes came gospel music, art, invention, strength beyond reason. They burned our churches, but they couldn't burn our spirit. They stole our land, but they couldn't steal our faith. They erased our history, but they couldn't erase our blood memory. We are the descendants of builders, the descendants of fighters, the descendants of people who refuse to die quietly. If you ever doubt it, remember this. When the mob torched the AME church in Perry, those men inside didn't beg. They sang. The roof fell while hymns rose into heaven. Their voices carried that melody straight into your soul, so you'd remember who you are. Look at what you've survived as a people. 4 centuries of slavery massacres, Jim Crow, police, brutality, incarceration, surveillance, and yet you're still here, still rising, still creating. That's divine protection. Every time the system tried to crush us, God used the debris to plant seeds. He preserved your bloodline through genocide. Why? Because he knew there'd come a generation bold enough to expose the lies. You're living in that generation. You might think finding this video was random. It's not. Maybe you were scrolling late at night, not even knowing why you clicked. But right now, you've become part of the chain of truth that reconnects what they severed. What will you do with it? You can stay silent, or you can teach your children. Tell them about Perry, about Rosewood, about Tulsa, about Wilmington, about all of them. Teach them where the wealth went. Teach them how faith survives even through fire. Let your children know holiness is not soft, it's strong. Justice is not anger, it's obedience. Because truth without action dies fast, and action without faith loses its purpose. So build, rebuild what they burned, build businesses again, buy land again, donate to funds that restore Black property again, pray while you plan, worship while you work. Because God's justice moves when His people move. You are not the ashes. You are the flame that still burns. And now, I'm talking straight to you. If this truth lit something inside, don't let it die. Leave a comment that says truth so others can find it. Hit that, like if you're done with the silence. Share it with someone who needs this revelation. When you share, the algorithm bends. The silence cracks. The story spreads. Don't scroll away. Take the message and make it mission. Now, before we close, I want to bless you. Take a deep breath. Let what you've heard settle, not in anger, but in clarity. Let's pray together. Father God, we come before you with our hearts open. We thank you for truth that outlives lies. We thank you for the souls that built Perry, for Samuel Carter, for Reverend Williams, for Martha and James Miller, for the Johnson brothers, for every name we will never know, yet you remember. Lord, we ask for justice that runs deeper than apology. We ask for restoration of what was stolen. We ask for courage to keep speaking when silence feels easier. Bless the descendants rebuilding from generational theft. Pour wisdom into their hands and strength into their spirits. Touch the hearts of those who inherited stolen wealth. Teach repentance that leads to restitution. God, show this generation how to heal with action. How to turn grief into rebuilding sorrow, into strategy rage, into righteous demand. You promised that those who sow in tears will reap in joy. So we plant this truth back into the earth of Perry and let it grow. Let every burned field become a harvest of remembrance. Let every lie give birth to revelation. We started in darkness, but we end in light. We claim your word instead of shame double portion, instead of silence song, instead of ashes beauty. In Jesus' name we say amen. Walk in truth. Demand justice. You are free. Until next time, build wealth, tell the truth, and never let them erase us again. Because they burned our towns, they buried our records, but they couldn't bury us. We are still here, and now the world will know when the prayer ends, the silence after it isn't empty. It's full. The weight of truth lingers in the air like smoke that refuses to clear. Now sit with it for a second. Feel what history does when it's finally told right. It doesn't just inform you, it changes the way you stand, the way you breathe, the way you see yourself in the mirror. Because once you know where your story begins, no lie can convince you you're small. That's the real healing. History isn't meant to trap you in pain. It's meant to show you you were never powerless. They told you your ancestors were broken, but the evidence says otherwise. Think about the timeline. From 1865 all the way through the 1960s, from freedom to civil rights, we were rebuilding again and again. Every cycle ended the same way, progress, and then backlash. But the comeback always came too. Always. So where are we now in that cycle? Right back at the edge of another rising. You can feel it all around. People are waking up. Documents resurfacing. Young researchers digging up names long buried. Descendants demanding justice and tracing property lines their grandparents were forced to flee. Our enemies back then fought to erase memory. Our weapon now is remembrance. Every post, every comment, every share, it might not look like much, but it's planting seeds of knowledge the same way our ancestors once planted fields they never got to harvest. Because someone has to finish what they started. You, me, all of us watching right now. Maybe you're sitting in your living room wondering what one person can do about something that happened 100 years ago. Listen closely. You're not powerless. You have more tools than they ever had. Every word you speak online becomes a spark. Every document you find, every name you record, every location you tag, it all rebuilds the map they burned. That's digital reparations, truth restoration, memory recovery. And it matters because institutions move when public memory moves. Laws change when conscience wakes. That's why they fought so hard to keep you asleep. Because the moment you see the pattern clearly, the entire system starts to crack. Let's picture it another way. Imagine history as a long hallway full of locked doors. Behind each one are stories like Perry's, Rosewood, Elaine, Wilmington, Greenwood. Each door labeled Riot Tension Incident as if the words themselves were deadbolts. Now imagine thousands of hands turning those knobs at once. The sound of locks breaking open is the sound of awakening. That's what this movement is about. Not revenge, not guilt, resurrection. The resurrection of buried memory. A century from now, people will talk about this exact moment, the decade when the silence finally broke, when hidden graves were found, when families reclaimed deeds, when descendants of victims and descendants of perpetrators sat at the same tables and said, "We need truth before we can have peace." And they will trace that change back to people like you who refused to scroll past pain because truth made you uncomfortable. You decided to listen. That decision alone bends history. But before you move into action, you have to clean the wound. Because collective trauma doesn't disappear, it mutates. The fear that once kept our grandparents quiet still whispers today. That whisper says, staying invisible is safe. Don't stir trouble. Don't reopen old wounds. But silence is the infection, not the cure. Healing starts when you stop protecting the lie. You heal by speaking the names again. Samuel Carter, Reverend Joshua Williams, Martha Miller, James Miller, Robert and William Johnson, Dr. Henry Washington. Say them, hear them, bring them back into sound. When you name the names, you undo what whitewashed records tried to erase. It's spiritual warfare disguised as remembrance. And every time a name is spoken, history gets rewired. That's why the truth always returns no matter how deep they bury it. The soil remembers. Even burned ground blooms again when watered with truth. Maybe you're thinking, how do I pass this on to my children without giving them only pain? Start by giving them pride. Tell them the darkness, yes, but also the light that came after. Tell them about the survivors who rebuilt with nothing but faith. Tell them our people fought wars without uniforms and still stood. Then show them how that strength runs in them too. You want them to walk into rooms knowing they come from inventors, business owners, and scholars, not just struggle. Show them proof. Pull census records. Find photos if you can. Map out generational stories. Create a family archive. That's how you rebuild a legacy. And when they look at systemic injustice today, police violence, school inequality, housing disparity, they'll understand it's not random. It's residual heat from the same fire. But they'll also know that every system man builds God can dismantle. He's done it before. Empires rise and fall, yet his justice keeps working through time like steady thunder. So don't underestimate what one act of truth-telling can do. A single spark of awareness can set off whole movements. Remember when journalists rediscovered Rosewood in the 1980s? It started with one survivor speaking. By 1994, Florida passed the Rosewood Compensation Bill. For the first time, a U.S. government paid restitution to massacre survivors. It was incomplete, yes, but it broke precedent. It proved acknowledgement was possible. Now multiply that by every forgotten town. Perry deserves the same reckoning. Imagine what would happen if states faced their ledgers honestly. If universities audited land grants tied to stolen property. If corporations traced their early profits to slave labor and terrorized communities. That's not fantasy, that's accountability. And it starts when public pressure refuses to die down. You hold more power than a vote when you hold the truth. Because truth shakes roots deeper than politics. It shifts culture. That's why this platform, this video, this moment matters. We're not just remembering, we're rewiring the narrative that shaped this nation. They used to meet in churches with rifles under pews because that was the only safe space for planning. Our modern sanctuary is information, data, story. The internet is the new church of liberation if we use it righteously. But don't forget, prayer was always part of the fight. Those elders in Perry sang through smoke. The melody of their faith carried farther than flames. When Reverend Williams prayed as his church burned, that prayer went airborne. It traveled down generations until it reached you. That's not metaphor, that's spiritual DNA. When you pray for justice today, your voice joins theirs. Old prayers plus new voices equal irresistible power. Can you imagine the chorus that must sound like in heaven? Right now, all those names rising back into remembrance after a century of silence. Angels standing at attention because truth finally broke through whitewashed history. God smiling because his people started connecting pain to purpose instead of despair. So don't let the world numb you. Feel this all the way. Let the righteous anger fuel the holy vision. Communities rebuilt schools, teaching real history descendants, compensated, streets renamed, churches restored. See it before you see it, because that's how faith operates. Your assignment isn't just to mourn, it's to manifest what was taken. Rebuild the store on Lafayette Street as a museum. Fund scholarships in those names. Demand Florida legislators acknowledge Perry officially. Write their stories into curricula so students know the cost of silence. Each act is a brick in the rebuilding of collective memory. And remember, this is for everyone. Truth doesn't divide, it unites. Because lies enslave both the thief and the victim. When truth comes out, both get free in different ways. If someone you know never learned about these massacres, don't argue in anger. Offer them evidence. Offer compassion with conviction. Let the undeniable facts do their work. This isn't about black or white. It's about wrong and right. And justice is the language of love in action. When you stand for it, you're walking with every ancestor who ever demanded dignity. Close your eyes for a second. Picture a line stretching from 1865 all the way to right now, January 2026. Each generation holding a torch. Some burned by it, some hiding its light for safety. Now it's in your hands. The question is simple. Do you let it dim, or do you raise it high enough for the next child to see that choice defines legacy? You might think you're just one person listening to a story online, but history always turns on people like that. A young girl writing in secret, a preacher refusing to flee, a mother teaching truth at her kitchen table. The biggest revolutions start with whispers that refuse to die. So whisper if you must, then speak louder, then shout if necessary. But never stop telling the truth. One day soon, a student in a Florida classroom will open a textbook and see the words Perry Massacre printed bold. They'll read names, they'll see photos, they'll know what really happened in December 1922. And when that happens, when the truth finally occupies the same pages as lies used to fill, you'll know this work wasn't wasted. Because until the truth is named, the dead can't rest. That's the real work of remembrance, setting souls free, ours and theirs. So here's your homework from history itself. Learn one new name from a forgotten town each month this year. Post it. Talk about it. Teach it to your family. Watch how that small discipline changes your awareness. Truth practiced daily becomes activism made holy. And for those listening who still wonder what faith has to do with justice, remember this. The cross itself was state violence, a lynching tree made holy because of what happened after. Resurrection. God doesn't ignore blood poured unjustly. He turns it into revelation. Perry's soil carries revelation now, and it's reaching your ears for a reason. If you've watched this far, don't leave this moment empty. Carve it into memory. Mark the name somewhere. Dedicate this day to learning the truth that was denied for a century. Then take one step forward, sign petitions, join preservation groups, volunteer with archives, donate to research funds. Whatever it is, just move. That motion connects you to the same current that moved through the ancestors. Because history isn't over, it's ongoing. And the future is just history that hasn't happened yet. So let's build the kind we'd be proud to leave behind. God blessed us with endurance so we could become the proof of His justice. They burned churches, and we built more. They stole children, and we raised communities. They banned education, and we wrote books. They buried names, and we resurrected stories. Now we carry truth in our voices. That means the fire's ours now, and this time it purifies instead of destroys. When you log off tonight, remember this isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of repair. The story they buried for 100 years has finally found you. And that means its next chapter is waiting to be written by your hands. Walk in that calling. And may the road from the ashes of Perry lead every descendant and every truth seeker straight to freedom. They burned the town, but the souls still shine. Because darkness can steal sight for a night, but it can't possess dawn. And dawn is here.